I'm live. Listen to this.
It's a fearful thing to love what death can touch. A fearful thing to love, to hope, to dream, to be, to lose. Thing for fools, this. And a holy thing. A holy thing to love. For your life has lived in me. Your laugh once lifted me. A word gift to me. To remember this brings painful joy. Is a human thing. A holy thing. To love what death has touched.
So that's a poem read out loud in the Netflix series Godless.
Godless. That's where the human race is. Or it has been for good millennia. We make religions up. We pretend we believe in God, but we don't act it. Every act of senseless meanness, every act of fear, every act where we are coming from our meat puppet self. That's what's wrong with humanity. That's what we need to do. People want to know why I lived with John. Well, I was next to death. I was sick. And the only way I could make myself better was to treat someone better. The only way we can heal ourselves of whatever malady, whatever emotional, physical malady we may have, comes from our loving someone else.
Yugoslavia, Turkey, the Philippines, these are all examples. Russia even had elections. So the point is that what we need to be aware of is how one of these strongmen, who is a narcissist, who is a sociopath, who is a sadist, and who is paranoid, is able to literally hijack a democracy and turn it into an authoritarian state. And a recent poll said that 50% of Americans are very worried that Americans' democracy is going to be destroyed and turned into an autocracy. So this is not a hysterical lunatic fringe. Half the country is very worried that this is happening.
And yet they do nothing about it because they're comfortable. The things that are going to end our country, or as life as we know it, is our addiction to convenience and the simplicity of believing something we're told. We're told that the communists are bad. Oh, this is terrible, We're told, we're going to go up in a mushroom cloud unless we invade Iraq. Our invasion of Iraq caused 1 million people's lives, and Dick Cheney and George Bush. George Bush is, spending his days painting, and Dick Cheney's going on CNN and MSNBC and telling us how bad Donnie Chump is. Donnie ain't any worse than anybody else. He's just a little more crass, a little, he's in New York. I call folks like Donnie trustafarians, meaning Daddy set up a trust and he never had to work a day in his life.
That offices were bugged by Barack Obama. These are classic grandiose and paranoid delusions. In addition to that, we also see evidence of cognitive decline. If you compare his cognitive functioning, if you compare the way he spoke in interviews in the 1980s to the way he speaks now, it's a shocking decrease in functioning.
Oh, it's so shocking. Oh, it's a decrease in what function did that moron have to begin with? Why did people vote for him? And why do we have a electoral college? The rich white guys at the very beginning said, hey, we got to do this because we can't let the average man vote. We can't have, what the founding fathers called a republic. Ben Franklin said back in the day, when they broke for lunch from the Continental Congress, someone said, so what are we going to have? We're going to have a king? What are we going to have? So we're going to have a democratic republic. Oh, what's that? Well, what that is when you guys are involved, it'll work. When you're not, it's going to be bad. And we are in the bad. We have been so addicted to convenience, comfort, and belief. For the last 200 years, we haven't done squat. I met a really nice old gentleman today in the Dollar Tree. And he was like going through his nickels. And we were talking. He said, oh, yeah, I believe in Donald Trump. He's going to save us. I said, how old are you? He said, well, I'm 89. I said, well, how long have you been voting? Well, I've been voting for, I can't even remember how long I've been voting, but I've been voting. I said, so what have you done all of your life? Well, I was a furniture salesman, and that's what I did. I came home and drank myself to sleep and watched television, and that's what we're all doing. Self-medicating and watching television.
Offices were bugged by Barack Obama. These are classic grandiose and paranoid delusions. In addition to that, we also...
Yes, delusions. That's what we're under. Delusions. So how are we going to step up? So as I was saying, that year I spent with John, he threw me out 26 times. I found 26 places to stay. And, each of those times I stayed away at least a few weeks, if not months. And, things occurred and I ended back with John because mostly John would go, please come back, please come back. And I would because John needed a friend. And I'm his friend. Yeah, so mind's eye. And that's called when we meditate, when we quiet down the raccoon in our head, little chipmunk, the monkey boy, and we breathe that 20% more prana and chi in and breathe out all of the waste products of our body. We cleanse ourselves and we give ourselves the ability to access our Akashic record, which is the record of everything our soul is. We do not live on a linear line. The Big Bang. Everything began, happened, and ended with that Big Bang. But we, our spirit self, can't relate to it because we stuck ourselves into this meat puppet. So we could have more convenience and believe. How are those Alps there?
is very worried that this is happening here.
What you mentioned a moment ago when you went through that litany of democracies that have voted themselves out of existence, that was the essential problem that James Madison devoted himself to in the year or so before the Constitutional Convention. He went back to that second floor library at Montpelier and he read and he thought, and that was the basic question he was asking himself. Why is it that all democracies and republics have failed? And almost all. I think there were a couple of Swiss cantons that had been around for a few hundred years. And what can we do if we're about to embark on this experiment? What can we do to form a government that would not collapse in that way. And of course, the solution he came up with was when he borrowed from Montesquieu, the separation of powers. Not only certainly the states were preserved, but then he had three branches of government. And what I'm hearing from you is that that constitutional framework, that division of power, is not necessarily doing what it's supposed to do.
Exactly. As alarming as it is to have a personality like Donald Trump, James Madison expected Donald Trump to arrive sooner.
These guys aren't going to the real truth of the matter, and that is from the beginning, there's been a hidden hand manipulating our lives. And we're addicted to comfort. We're addicted to ease. It's so convenient. People would sell their mother down the river for convenience. People are ready to go to war for a belief. They believed that a bunch of Al-Qaeda dudes who were hanging out in a cave, got a hold of some aircraft and flew them into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Oh, just by the way, the Pentagon, the one where that airplane went in, went through the window where everyone who knew what was going on, the day before the plane hit the Pentagon, Donald Rumsfeld told everyone that, oops, we lost $2 trillion. Next day, everyone and all the documents and tapes and every bit of evidence about what happened was burned up.
That his offices were bugged by Barack Obama. These are classic grandiose and paranoid delusions.
Oh, yes, they are. So what are you going to do about these grandiose illusions? I mean, Donald Trump, he is the X-lax of our body politic, And what are you going to do? What are you going to do?
Radio.
Say that men use religion in different ways, and they sometimes use it in bad ways.
So there's a poem that the preacher reads after he shows up. And it's a beautiful poem. I expected him to be reading from the Bible, and I thought, gee, that's not from the Bible, I don't think. Scott, where does that poem come from?
It comes from a Jewish poet in either late 11th century, early 12th century, named Yehuda Halevi, and I hope I'm saying that right. Get into the script. This would be a great thing to have in the story. And what I'd really written down on a card was, "'Tis a fearful thing to love what death can touch." That phrase itself was enough for me, and I thought maybe I'll put it on a headstone. I'm not sure how I'm going to use it, but it's such a beautiful phrase. I need to put it somewhere in the story. It just seems so right. Cut to many years later, and I'm now turning the story into a miniseries. And I'm still not sure where I'm going to use it, but now I've unearthed the entire poem, and which is easy to find, and I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to put it. And I realize that I want to use it for one of the funerals that are in the story later in the day. But I don't want anyone to know about it,
Our life
because
is a
it's such a powerful poem. Every time I read it, I would get incredibly emotional.
It's such a beautiful poem, yes.
It's gorgeous. It's perfect. And it's one of the best poems about grief.
Yes, my I'm trying to be arty here and play. This is radio that I recorded years ago.
If you type in the name Julian Assange, for instance, that will not direct you to sites that support WikiLeaks, as I do. And so that, coupled with net neutrality, I think is indicative of the fact that power elites are frightened. They're frightened because the neoliberal ideology of global capitalism, it no longer has any credibility across the political spectrum. And so their critics, who have, such as myself or Chomsky or anyone else, has been already pushed to the margins of the media landscape, are now more of a threat and more of a target. So getting into this game of censorship is one that those, and history bears this out, is a game we're going to lose.
Chris Hedges, last question for you. A sign of hope for people of conscience. You talk about resistance. The issue is not really political, but it's spiritual and moral. Can you kind of conclude with that?
Sure. I mean, that's what resistance entails. In order to resist successfully, it entails accepting all sorts of qualities that the hedonism of consumer society tells us we should flee from, which includes self-sacrifice, even suffering. It's not rational. It's not about the pursuit of happiness. It's about the pursuit of freedom. It accepts that even if we fail, there is an inner freedom and dignity that comes with defiance. And perhaps this may be the only dignity and freedom and in some ways true happiness we will ever know. As many, Martin Luther King and others have pointed out, resistance is really the supreme act of love. Most of those who resisted successfully, those icons that we all hold up, Sitting Bull, Malcolm X, Martin, Emma Goldman, were defeated, at least in the calculation of the powerful. But the power of their moral presence and their courage is one that sustains resistance and rebellion itself. And in that sense, I do argue, as you correctly point out, that there is a spiritual element to resistance, maybe even a religious, I don't mean necessarily in a formal orthodox way. One can, in my mind, lead the moral or even the religious life without ever being part of a religious group or embracing a particular doctrine. It is about battling radical evil. It's about becoming a whole and complete human being. It's about overcoming estrangement. It's about honoring the sacred. And in the end, it's about being free, because when you carry out acts of resistance at that moment, you are a free man or woman.
Chris Hedges, America, the Farewell Tour, a very important book. Thank you for all your years of work and for spending time with me today and for this book.
Thank you, John.
You've been listening to Progressive Spirit, progressivespirit.net. Every week you hear Progressive Spirit.
So spirituality, again, I grew up in a Roman Catholic family. I was the son that was going to be a priest. I had mentors, Cardinal Cushing, Thomas Merton. Thomas Merton, you need to go read his books because he brought the concept of being a Christian was, as Chris Hedgen was talking about, was to resist materialism, was resist the comfort, of being right, of believing, I know it's right, it's what's in the book. The book was written by God. Well, who is God? There's a lot of science out there. And what is science? Our senses, sight, hearing, smell, taste, feeling, our senses and our brain are only 0.005% of what's out there. Back in the day of Tesla and Morey and all the other great physicists and thinkers and understanders and questioners, from the Greeks to today, these people knew that, they called it the ether. Now we call it dark energy. Well, there is a space, string theory says that there are multiple universes out there. There's lots of me's out there, lots of you's out there. And they're right next to each other. I mean, they're right there, So when we see a ghost or when we feel deja vu, what that is our present experience kind of brushes up against that other parallel universe. And Tesla and Benjamin Franklin, what was he doing out there with a kite and a key in a thunderstorm? He discovered what was known as zero-point energy. That's why everyone in Europe thought he was like, other than being a party animal, he started a night, when Jefferson went over to visit Paris, he spent his time in libraries and looking at architecture, and the French thought, he's a smart guy, but boring. Franklin, well, everyone knew Franklin was smart, but beyond that, he started a nightclub called the Hellfire Club, where men and women went into dressing rooms, took all their clothes off, put on fancy masks, and went out and had a good time with each other in the confines of the nightclub. And that's why the French came and, backed us up in the French Revolution. Yes, they hated their cousins, the English. But all of these things were manifested by this hidden hand that's been around for billions of years. Look at Mars. Richard Hoagland, has been, studying this forever and pretty much has proven that the face on Mars is connected mathematically to the pyramids on Earth. That you look at Mars and there's a scar that goes one end to the other, deeper than the ocean and wider than, how long the Grand Canyon is. And it's what it is, the death of the dinosaurs there was a planet that was right between Mars and Earth, and it exploded. And where do you think the myth of Superman came from? That was it. All the Atlanteans and Illuminati, Lemurians came from these outer planets after this great conflagration, and Earth was, kind of a lowly, backwards kind of spot in this location in our solar system, and that's one reason why everyone on this planet is such a moron, is because the energetics of this planet is moron. I mean, we have more. We live on a planet of abundance, and yet a handful of people own everything and cause scarcity, cause wars, cause conflict. When are you guys going to wake up? And the only way to bring this out to the folk is by art, right? Now, the carnival has been around forever, and it goes all the way back to Egypt. And every time the powers that be wanted to introduce or to give some space or let off some pressure so they wouldn't get blamed, they'd have a ceremony, a carnival, whoop-de-doo, and it just kept happening, all the way up through time immemorial. The Romans had bread and circus. We have fast food and big screen TVs. Our modern materialism was brought to America via Mr. Rockefeller and Mr. Edison and Mr. Carnegie, and they bankrolled the Wild West shows and the movies and media, and they backed it up with Mr. Sears's catalog and the railroad, which is just like the internet. Sears made his catalog the size of a Bible, and the pages were like toilet paper. So you took it in the preview, and you were pinching a loaf and looking at what you might want to buy. Oh, look at that. Oh, that's a nice pair of shoes. Oh, that's a nice wood stove. And he was the first one to show women in their underwear in the catalog, and the guys like that. They sure took it to the woodshed there, and And they would then go down to the train station and put some money down on buying something, and it would be telegraphed back to Chicago, and within weeks it would arrive. Whereas if you had that wood stove made by the guy in town, it might take a whole year, and it might look weird and it might not even work, if he wasn't a good smithy. Anyway, this is something I want you guys to think about. It's 25 minutes and 37 seconds. So I'm going to wait till it's 26:66 and I'm going to come back at 7. And I want you guys to think about this. Go connect to others that you know and say, hey, Al's going to have a live chat at 7 p.m. And let's make it a big deal. Let's put a lot of people on it. And I'll tell a lot of stories. And but this is just the warm up. Okay, here it is, 26 minutes, 10 seconds. And I want you guys to think about how to resist through love. Giving the person a space to get on the road. Letting an old lady take your space, waiting on the line anywhere. Being nice, taking care of each other, So let's hear that, okay? Let's see that. Let's be that, okay? Okay, I'm gonna wait till the 6 shows up here. 5, 6, okay?